served on the Environmental and River Gorge Committee in the Longfellow area of Minneapolis since 2015. He's helped me with grants and efforts to add pollinator habitat and rain gardens. He started an informal neighborhood gardening for wildlife mentorship program, matching experienced gardeners with new gardeners and sharing plants and practical knowledge. In 2020, Daniela secured a Board of Water Soil Resource State grant through the Lawns to Legume program, making Longfellow an official demonstration neighborhood, which included teaching about native plants and bumblebee habitat. From 2016 to 2021, he brought together all of these neighborhood projects and officially certified the largest neighborhood in Minneapolis as a community-wide habitat through the National Wildlife Federation, in effect adding a whole city park size of native plants and wildlife habitat. So he has quite a bit of knowledge working out there in the communities and coordinating efforts as both a master naturalist and habitat team leader. So I want to thank Dan for coming today, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thanks for joining me today on this beautiful day. And some of you may have thought you were seeing Ava, who is with Altlawns. She's actually in Richfield, Bloomington. And I'm kind of on the other side of the tracks here in Minneapolis. And we're fiercely independent, different efforts being made, but we definitely run in parallel with our efforts to provide some alternatives to lawns. So we'll definitely go over some of that today and also go into some of the specific things that I like to focus on as well. Yeah, Ava's way friendlier than I am, but I'll try my best. I'll try my best here. And if anyone wants to contact me, my email is right there. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions afterwards. I do like to start by acknowledging that we are on the Dakota homeland here. We are also on Anishinaabe land, or the Ojibwe. And I just recently found this factoid here, which it really blew my mind. Indigenous people make up % of the global population, but they protect some 80% of its biodiversity. And the lands they manage are often exceed that of protected areas. So they really protect and enhance the biodiversity. So that tells me a few things. One, Indigenous people know something, right? So if you get a chance to hear from an Indigenous person or a tribal elder, I think they're worth listening to, right? Worth listening to. And also this adds a whole other aspect to all this land back business that's going on. And we're living in historical times that tell you that there's actually huge chunks of land back happening here in Minnesota, which I think personally is wonderful. And according to this statistic, if true, there's a good likelihood it's a key not only to all the social, economic benefits and justice, but also it might just be key to the environmental benefits and also saving the planet, right? I happen to make my living as a realtor, real estate broker. And so I've seen firsthand these new construction areas where the soil is scraped away and new buildings put in. It's not usually the original prairie here in Minneapolis or in the suburbs. It's usually a farm. And the estate finally sold that land to builders. And but I've seen firsthand, and it just always reminds me, like, okay, I gotta plant some native plants. I gotta create some habitat. And I hope you will be a part of that for me, my redemption, to help create more habitat in the world than I've helped to take away. Because I'm a cog in the machine, like many of us. A lot of what I'm presenting, well, all my efforts really were originally inspired by Douglas Tallamy when I heard him speak. If you ever get a chance, his presentations are just the best. His slideshows, his information is great. And he's an entomologist at the University of Delaware. He has a specialty in butterflies and moths. So he really is the one who really raised the alarm bells about losing our biodiversity, losing our native plants, which then translates into losing our butterflies and moths, a great deal of them. So all I'm really doing is trying to translate what he has presented, and he's out east. He's more in the deciduous forest, eastern deciduous forest. but I'm trying to translate what he's talking about into a very localized, into our zip codes, basically, and try to provide resources to help us easily trans and get some habitat in our area. I also became a Minnesota Master Naturalist, so I'm a volunteer. I highly recommend if you want to dive into learning more about our different environmental areas and our nature here in Minnesota. These are wonderful courses. There's 3 different ones: Big Woods, Big Rivers, Northwoods, Great Lakes, and then Prairies and Potholes. And after you take even one course, you can become a Master Naturalist volunteer. You have to volunteer 40 hours a year and also have 8 hours of advanced training every year as well, if you want to. Otherwise, just take the course. It's really fun. Or you can read this book here, John R. Tester. He literally wrote the book on our natural heritage. It's fantastic. Reads very well, even though it is a text. And normally my presentation is a lot longer than today. I'm trying to abbreviate it a little bit. We'll see how far we get today. So hopefully I can get to some of the main points here for you. So again, Douglas Tallamy, according to him, 50% of the Earth's land mass is used for agricultural purposes or heavy grazing. And I heard recently David Attenborough, he mentioned 80% of the crops are used for feeding livestock, actually. So that is a lot of, humans need habitat too, but that is a good chunk of the Earth devoted just to that. And then in the US, about almost 45% of the remaining land is urban and suburban sprawl and development, and industrial areas and so forth. So that really leaves about 5%. Now, this is in the lower 48 states, okay? About 5% remaining is really devoted to wildlife habitat. He said Minnesota's doing a little better than most. We got about 35%. So yay for Minnesota. And I would say that's in just certain parts of Minnesota, right? Like maybe up north, not necessarily out west, western Minnesota, or really any other part of Minnesota. And then, but some states, like Nebraska, it's far, far less. So in some ways, we're making up for some other states, perhaps. Another way to look at all this is, found this in The Guardian a ways back. So 70% of the birds on the planet are farmed poultry. 30% are wild birds. 60% of the mammals are livestock, mostly cattle and pigs. 36% are humans. And there's only 4% for wild animals. So that kind of like matches that idea of 5% wildlife habitat right there. And that's how Douglas Tallamy talks about, he calls this the law of nature. If you have a habitat, well, you're going to have a lot of biodiversity. As you start removing chunks of the habitat, then you start losing that biodiversity. Until, the end, when you have hardly anything left, really, you have some of the strongest, most adaptable, and for some of us, some of the most annoying of the creatures, right? And some of them become like pests for some of us. So it's that's something to think about. So here's what we know: a lot of the birds are gone since 1970. 1 in 4. One of the most frightening things I think about is just how many insects we've lost. In Minnesota, we always use the example of, we each do our own experiment when we go for a drive, especially up north. When I was a kid, you go up north, there is bug splatter all over the windshield, right? It's a lot of work to even, to clean off that windshield. And now you go up north and sometimes you get hardly any bug splatter. So we're each kind of doing our own experiment there as we drive around. And you can really notice we have lost, a lot of the insects, even here. And that, that's a base of the food chain, right? So that's very concerning. So now the UN is talking about the possible. So there's been 5 great extinctions in the history of the Earth, but this one might be being caused by human activity. So a human caused great extinction, and so they're talking the impending doom of like 1 million species, plants and animals, in danger of extinction in the near future. And the main drivers, number 1 is habitat loss, but then there's always, overexploitation, pollution, invasive species, disease, and then climate change. The only thing I want to say about that, it's all important, it's all interrelated, but I see so many articles talking about everyone being afraid of climate change. and or as I like to say, human caused climate upheaval or devastation. But the more I read it, I realize they're actually talking about habitat loss. So I just wish people could just be a little more exact about what they're really talking about. Soon, I mean, we're already starting to see the effects of climate change for sure, but a lot of what has happened is from habitat loss and these other things here. If we solved climate change today, that was not even a problem anymore, we would probably still be facing mass extinction because of these other things. So that's all I have to say there. But it's all important. It's all interconnected. Each of us have to do what we can, right? And that's what today is about as well. Just doing what we can, even in our own yards. Hopefully, we can make a difference. So one of the problems too is barriers for wildlife. So there's roads, right? There's fences, mowed lawns. In this picture, just imagine a turtle trying to climb a fence, get across the road, avoid any lawnmowers, and then make it to that lake, right, or vice versa. So it's tough. So there, there's careers and jobs and industries in solving all these problems, and boy, we need to solve them. So try your best to try to connect areas. The more of us that do things in our yards, there's still the roads and the fences, but birds, butterflies, they can fly, right? So just trying to get them closer together and connect them as best we can really help. I also think the biggest barriers actually are fear, lack of knowledge, lack of familiarity. So we just, yeah. To me, this is all about a change in our culture. So, and hopefully kids will learn more and more about wildlife and our native plants, and it'll become second nature for all of us. Now, this is still by way of introduction. I have like the longest introduction in the world, but this is already a big, important resource that I want to share with you. And if you ever go to this link, you can get lots more information about each of these topics. But this is through the National Wildlife Federation. And I like using this format in my neighborhood because it makes it so simple. It's very user-friendly, and you can make it very complex if you want to. But all it's saying is that there's 4 basic components of habitat, wildlife habitat. So you're just providing water, food, cover, and places to raise young. Okay, so and then once you do provide that in your yard, you can certify it as well. So that's kind of fun. So it feels like you have some kind of recognition for all your efforts. And but you can also certify your business if you provide all those 4 things: water, food, etc. Your house of worship. And the National Wildlife Federation has specific examples and ideas for each of these situations. You can also certify your school, and they have a lot of resources specifically for schools. And then you can sign up, right? Prove to the world that you did it. And it also helps explain to them why there's all these plants here that they've never seen before. And then I went kind of crazy. All right. I decided, well, I certified my yard. What do I do now? And I decided, let's certify our entire neighborhood. And the National Wildlife Federation has a great program for that. It's based on population. And so for our neighborhood, again, the biggest neighborhood in Minneapolis, it took me 5 years, or took us 5 years. So each of these green areas, that little dot is a house or a business that has certified their property and are saying that they are wildlife friendly. So once you reach that certain number, your entire community is considered a wildlife habitat. And we completed that in 2021. If any of you are out there, hopefully, I hope more and more neighborhoods would consider doing something like this, or it could be a whole county. It could be even a homeowners association. I think that would be great if homeowners associations would do things like this, and the neighborhood works together. So it's kind of fun having that goal. And I'd love to talk to anybody if they would like to find out more about this and maybe some ideas on how to spread the word with this to people. It's basically just a good excuse to talk to people and do some outreach to talk about plants and animals. So it ends up being a lot of fun talking to your neighbors about it. Now in Minnesota, we have 3, actually 4, but 3 primary big biomes that come together right here in Minnesota. And that's the reason this is paradise, if you ask me. We have such a wide array of wildlife and plants, and it all comes together here. we can just drive just a little ways and we can see all sorts of different environments, which is really fun. And we also just wherever we are in Minnesota, you can see a wide array of plants and animals. So it's very unique. The DNR has added another biome there, tallgrass aspen parkland in the north there. Just complicated for me, but I do need to start adding that in more often. And you can also go down to the granular level. So here in Hennepin County in Minneapolis, where I live, we know that historically it was oak savanna. And there's even some bogs, and there's, of course, the lakes, but there's also prairies, and there's even a little bit of the big woods nearby. So that's very interesting. The reason we know this, and the reason we kind of know historically what the land was like, at least in the 1800s, it's kind of like a snapshot of what the environment was like in the 1800s, or if you will, how the Native Americans were managing the land up to that point. And is from the public land survey notes that were taken. So every so often they would write down all the trees and vegetation they saw. So we have a really nice, just amazing view of what was there in the 1800s. And that generally is, there's many ways to define what a native plant is, but I think most people defer to this. If it was there on this map in the 1800s, it's probably what we would call a native plant of Minnesota. And humans are great at changing things. So I guess you've all seen this meme, it's all over the place. So the wild cabbage, because of horticulturalists, they turned it into cauliflower and Brussels sprouts. Probably don't want to eat wild cabbage, but over time, these horticulturalists can change these things and make them very just what we humans would love to eat. And they do that with flowers too, right? They change the flower up. Maybe they want a different color. Maybe they want it to bloom longer. Humans are very visual, so these horticulturalists can transform wild plants into something that is more appealing to us. Usually it's a visual. Unfortunately, like Landscape Alternatives informed me from his genetics class in botany, is that when you change when you start changing those genetics or selecting for the color and so forth, one of the first things to go is the nectar content. So, and also you're changing the chemistry of each plant. So all that to say is, these horticulturalists have changed things, and it's amazing they can do this, right? And it might be very pleasant for us. You can eat certain things. The flowers are more beautiful to us, but for wildlife, stick with the native plants, stick with what's been there for millions of years that these animals have evolved with. So if you see anything with a quotation mark there, or those little marks and a special name on it, like this one says Chiquita, that's not a native plant. It's been transformed, it's been changed in some way. And it could be trademarked, it could be registered, it's owned by the grower. So again, it might be very pretty, it might be something you have in your yard for yourself, okay? But don't kid yourself. The best way to go for wildlife is just to stick with the native plants. And so it'll just have the common name, and maybe it'll have 2 Latin names with it. It's the native plant. But as soon as you see those quotation marks, okay, that's not a native plant. I don't teach native plants here, but I highly recommend still Landscaping with Native Plants of Minnesota, by Lynn Steiner. It's a little bit older. She does list a lot of cultivars in there, so just ignore those. But still, I think the best for a beginning gardener, if you're just starting out with this stuff. She has lots of good examples, explanations. She goes into the biomes and has great plant lists for certain. So I highly recommend that. These days, a lot of us, you get online, you just want to find something. Prairie Moon Nursery website is fantastic for, you can sort, they have a database in their website, so you can sort native plants by what color you want, by the height you want, how sunny or shady the spot is, and on and on and on. They have lots of different categories. Very, very useful. And the map ranges are good too. You can see the range map, see where these plants are native to. But most of them are in Minnesota. And And then this is a little more advanced book, but this is unbelievable. This just came out, I think, last year. And especially if you live in the prairie biome, this would be for you, okay? This is like dedicated to prairie plants. And it is, if you're a professional, even a landscaper, you'll want to get this book if you want to work with native plants. It is truly amazing what they compiled here with that one. Really good, brand new book. Okay, so let's set the scene here. This is how I explain why it's so important, what we're trying to do in our neighborhoods here. So coniferous forest up north by 1930s. Actually, I'm sorry, this is all of Minnesota. Okay, all the forests had been logged pretty much. Okay, and the lumber companies moved west. They missed a couple spots, and by pure accident. So those are amazing to go visit. And there's some old growth forests now, but it's just good to know it was all logged, and some has been clear cut more than once, right? And as it grows back, there's different problems that arise. The prairie, less than 2% of it still exists. A lot of it is choked with non-native grasses and other invasives. Oak savanna is kind of part of the deciduous forest, right between the deciduous forest and the prairie area. Hardly any of that remains. And for the wetlands, actually up north, that's the good news. About 75% of it is still there and in good shape, amazingly. So hopefully we can keep it that way. Central Minnesota there, it's rough. There's a lot of invasives, and we're all trying our best, right? And so yeah, we got to keep working on that one. And then of course in the farming areas, it's a lot harder, and a lot of the wetlands and stuff have been drained. Most of the wetlands have been lost. So, and I am a city slicker, so I know nothing. I can't say anything about the agricultural practices, what we can do in that area, but I know there's people working on it, and I hope people keep working on it. What we can do there. Now, according to E.O. Wilson, a great naturalist that passed away a couple of years ago, he came up with a project, and what he's saying is that we need to protect 50% of the earth and sea to protect our wildlife and for it to flourish, to avoid all those huge extinctions. That is quite an undertaking. And I think in our little yards, like in an urban area, I would say, come on, like maybe 33% is reasonable, right? We can dedicate 33% of our yards, so a third of it. So a third to the house and the structures, a third to the hardscapes, and I would include grass in that. And maybe a third of it we can devote to trees and gardens and native plants, right? So somewhere in there, 33 to 50%. Good luck. And it would be great if every city or every county did the same thing and could protect that much. And then the big question too is, so it's very important to note that yes, we need natural areas too. We need a lot more of it, right? Especially all across the country. We need a lot more parks. We need a lot more protected areas just devoted to wildlife. But again, the farm areas there, what do we do? Coniferous forest that does have a lot of parks. Maybe we can still fit in some more parks here and there. But where is there an opportunity to maybe make a big impact? And you already saw that slide. Gave away the surprise there, but yes, we have way too many lawns in the U.S., right? It's the largest irrigated crop that exists, if you think about it. And so much of it is wasted. And I'm not a person that says you have to get rid of every square inch of grass. Like the lawn is serving to me, it has to serve a function. You walk on it without tripping on something, right? And tripping on a plant. Maybe you have to play sports, have a picnic. There's a place for it, right? But most of it is just holding space, and it's just wasting space. Whereas we could convert it to habitat and native plants, and that's something Douglas Talony is working on as well. So we could basically add the equivalent of numerous national parks if some of us converted our lawns to native plants. So what this is all about is rewilding. So creating wildlife habitat in our backyards and urban spaces. You might also hear about so you hear about restoration. And I read an article recently. I think this is very a good difference in explaining it. Restoration is a little more top down. The rewilding efforts I'm talking about is more bottom up, okay, coming from the community and just neighbors like me. So the restoration work, the DNR comes in, or National Park Service, they can come in with serious budgets, scientists, experts, designs, and sometimes they can, they bring in fire, and they even have to use herbicides quite often to clear things, and whole armies of volunteers, right? So so that's a very different kind of top-down approach, and it's very historical. This is what was planted in this area, and they're trying to recreate that ecosystem. Whereas the bottom-up rewilding efforts, again, it's neighbors. We're not scientists. Like we try to listen to the best science we can and do our best, but it's really a bottom-up effort where we're just trying to create a functional environment. It might not be the perfect environment, might not be what was there in the 1800s exactly, but we're just trying to create more habitat, pollinator habitat or bird habitat, to try to help out as best we can. Hopefully we can help sustain some of the butterflies and birds. We might still lose them, right? Because we still need wildlife habitat. But if we can just add a little bit more into these urban areas, we could make a big difference. So yeah, we need more plumbers, we need more, teachers, more everybody to just do a little bit more with learning about native plants and encouraging that. Another word for this work is naturescaping. You hear that sometimes. Garden for Wildlife, again, with the National Wildlife Federation. You hear about permaculture, lots of great ideas in there, but just watch out, it starts getting into agriculture and goats and all stuff like that. So it's all connected, but just FYI, it's a little more focused on the agriculture as well. And like Ava calls it, Altlawn. So you take your typical suburban lawn or urban lot like this, just has your basic foundation, shrubs and grass, and maybe you could convert it to something like this. So there's a lot more native plants, a lot more places for cover, a lot more nectar sources and seeds for the wildlife, right? So it's just much richer. Already you're getting a lot more biodiversity with that. And you'll start seeing, as soon as you start planting the native plants, you will start seeing butterflies and birds, all sorts of things, even bumblebees. This is our Minnesota state bee, our rusty patch bumblebee right here. It's also for the federally endangered species. Used to be very common in that green area there. It was all over the place there, very common. But now it's making its last stand literally in our backyards and often in urban city areas, which is, why, right? So, it's the usual things, habitat loss. We can't prove it, but we suspect pesticides and herbicides play a role in their demise. There's always diseases with these endangered species, it seems, always somewhere, and it's just terrible. And a lot of bumblebees were used to grow tomato. They're great for pollinating tomatoes, FYI. So some greenhouses used to raise them, and some may have spilled out and spread this disease as well. And then you start getting into a small bottlenecking population. That's no good. And then climate change, of course, it seems to be more and more. Very recent articles about this seems to be playing a big role in the demise of the bumblebees. But ultimately, we still don't really know what's going on. It's tough. These are the main suspects, but it's so hard to prove things. So we're just trying our best, add the native plants and habitat. Hopefully they'll make it. So in our yards, and this presentation gets more and more difficult as you go. So you can go as far as you want, right? It's a free country. You can do what feels comfortable to you. So there's some easy steps to do at first, and then it takes some effort further on down the road. But one thing you can do for sure is just stop spraying all the chemicals in the yard, right? Pesticides, fungicides, on and on and on. So just stop, do no harm, and you will have made a huge difference if that's all you did. So it's really time to think about that. That's where you're kind of crossing the Rubicon there, right? So if you dedicate yourself to not poisoning your yard and the animals and the waterways, because a lot of it runs off, right? So that's a big problem, not just for the farm areas and agricultural areas, which is a big contributor to the hypoxia zone in the Gulf of Mexico, or all the nitrogen and all the riches of our country flows into that Gulf of Mexico, and it's so rich it actually nothing can live there. It's actually poisoned so that nothing can exist there. Um, but it's not just agricultural areas; it's definitely everything in the watershed, and definitely also urban areas with all the road chemicals, salt chemicals, and our yard chemicals. In Minnesota, ugh, it's so depressing to see, but it's what we're working on, right? So these are all these waterways are not good. So this is from the Minnesota, the Pollution Control Agency keeps track of this. So these are all the impaired waterways. Um, so you're like, Dan, if we stop using herbicides, aren't we going to have a lot of weeds in our yards? And the answer is yes, absolutely, you will. Take a look at that, right? So, um, so what do you do? Well, if you mow it, it looks green. For me, that's fine. With my yard, I'm fine. It looks green. So we might need a new definition of lawn, right? I almost fell off my chair when I heard this from a landscaper. Lawn, a mix of green plants cut to an even height. I think that's a fine definition right there. That's just fine. Some of us like to let some of our weeds grow through on our lawns, maybe add a little bit of nectar source that way. And they even came up with a fancy word for it, a bee lawn. So maybe you can call it a bee lawn, and then maybe your neighbors will understand, maybe, and they might appreciate that. You could say the honeybees really like it, which they do. That's what I call this, is a honeybee lawn, because our native bees, they want the native plants and the rich biodiversity and and so forth, the habitat. But this is definitely something that can help. I saw this yard. This was really cool. They actually had a whole lawn, so it has the grass, but they also have a whole lawn of violets. Violets are native plants, uh, so that's pretty cool. And now I'm not saying we just stop maintaining the areas. We do have to mow, right? We don't. I'm not encouraging this sort of thing. Um, and in the city, interestingly enough, there are abandoned areas. So again, I'm not recommending this for your yard, okay? But it is interesting in these urban areas, these abandoned lots and these abandoned areas, they think that might be one of the big reasons bumblebees are surviving better in urban and suburban areas than further out where there's so many chemicals and things are managed so carefully. So these unmanaged areas actually could have some benefits. Um, Again, not recommending that for our yards, but now this is an alternative to a lawn. Yes, a bunch of gravel and rock. Yes, that's not what I'm talking about either. Okay, there's um, and the mulch. People love mulch. So many designers, right? They have the three rocks, or maybe they'll have the three shrubs or the three grasses coming up, and then it's just covered with rock or mulch. No, that's not what I'm talking about exactly either. Um, this is more prepped, ready to be planted, if you ask me. Okay, this is another way, right? Just a bunch of hostas. That's okay. You've already made it way better because now you have some cover, right, for the animals, for some chipmunks and birds. But they're not native plants, though. It's there. You can go yet another step further. Um, this has to be a joke. Okay, one of my neighbors, they're planting all these orange lilies that are just all over the place in Minneapolis, and not native. Then there's the creeping bellflower, very weedy, all over the place. They're pretty, so people still let them go, and then they find out the next year their whole yard is covered in it. So that is not what I'm talking about. Don't use invasives. And then I do like using lilies as a placeholder, but because they're pretty, but they're not going to add much habitat. Okay. My neighbors, they tried their best. I love them dearly. They tried to do it. These are all native plants, really fantastic habitat. but maybe not right next to the sidewalk, right? Because there's people that need to walk on the sidewalk. There are wheelchairs. There are people that are allergic to bees, and believe me, will be severely freaked out because there will be a lot of bees on all these flowers. So maybe something like this. Again, you don't have to do your entire lawn, right? Maybe surround it with some rocks or some kind of garden edging so people know, that you're being intentional with it. Here's another example, Lawns to Legumes program. Metro Blooms, fantastic landscaping company. They're also a nonprofit. They actually did quite a few projects in my neighborhood when we had big neighborhood projects to put in rain gardens or design things. They create a lot of designs for us and helped us with installing a lot of habitat areas. So this is just a really pretty design I think they came up with, really beautiful. And so they're a really great resource. They do workshops too. You can also hire them to do landscaping like this. And then I also like to just stop for a moment and think about just one single plant. What it does is, and we all know that it converts, takes the carbon dioxide, turns it to oxygen, and so we can breathe. Like we should be thankful enough just for that, right? That's amazing. But it does even way more than that. It also can create food from the sun, right? So like, and then a lot of creatures eat those plants. So it's amazing, right? What a single plant can do. On top of that, the food that it's creating, it also shares it with down in the soil. So it actually leaks or has these root exudates, and these sugars that it has created, it releases them into the ground. And that's like that's the food bell, ding ding, come and get it. Food is ready, and that's when all the creatures under the soil come looking for food. And and so there's and then there's also a relationship it has with the fungus in the area, and each plant might have its own kind of mycorrhizal fungus that it partners with. So the fungus can reach out much further and bring in some nutrients from some other rocks and soils far away, give it to the plant in exchange gives it some sugars. Pretty good deal. And then some bacteria might get involved, and there's certain plants, they're called legumes, that have a little chamber there where they're providing sugars to these beautiful bacteria. And the bacteria, in exchange, takes nitrogen from the air somehow and converts it into nitrogen in the ground, which is what plants need. So that's fertilizer. That's what fertilizer is. It's the nitrogen that's in the ground there. So those are some examples of our Minnesota native legumes. We have quite a few. They're really beautiful. So stop treating the soil like dirt. You've probably heard that before. All this to say is one of the most important habitats are happening right underneath your feet. You'll never see it or know what's happening, but rest assured, if you stop poisoning your yard, all these creatures can exist, coexist, and the food web begins in the soil. So nematodes, rotifers, you can only see these with microscopes. Springtails, you might see them. Not as beautiful as this. This is Madagascar, but we do have the snow fleas. Those are springtails. Our queen bumblebees, they overwinter just sometimes on the surface of the ground or just an inch or so underneath the ground. So remember, they're there. That queen is responsible for creating a whole new colony. So queen goes, that whole colony is lost. And then we actually have thousands of different native bees. Most of them you'll never see or notice. A lot of them are solitary bees, but many of them are underground. And so if again you're poisoning the ground, you're going to poison all these creatures too. And ants. Wow, I've always loved ants. I don't understand. Some people really hate ants. I think it's just some kind of visceral. I don't know what it is, honestly. I think it's maybe confused with termites, and there's just the look of it can really freak people out. But I just want to raise up our ants because they do wonderful things for the environment. They spread seeds around. They also, aerate the soil, or so all sorts of things, and some things can eat them as well. Cicadas, they're popping out all over the place these days, and isn't that cutie? Look at that. You might just see their skins when they emerge from their shell there and turn into flying creatures, but they're underground for many years, right? or a lot of ours are annuals, but there's some other parts of the country that you've been hearing about underground for 7 years or 17 years. It's amazing. The good old pillbugs or roly-polies. These are the crustacean. Very good. They feed on dead plant matter. Somebody has to do it, right? Snails, mollusks. These are all great snacks for birds, right? And also, believe it or not, where is the? I'll show you in a second. But even fireflies, they're underground for a while and they feed on the slugs. So one big happy family here. Burying beetles, they're all over Minnesota. I guess I may have finally seen my first one last week. I've been looking now. But something has to eat all the dead carcasses and so forth, right? So if we poison all this stuff, what are we? I guess we're going to have to go out and clean up all the messes, right? And that's what a lot of us have to do with our lawns. But a lot of the wildlife provides these services. And fireflies, even in my inner city here in Minneapolis, I still every once in a while see a firefly. They're coming from the river. I know that's where they're multiplying, but the interesting thing is that they spend 2 or 3 years underground before they finally emerge for their final flight and trying to mate and lay eggs. Then it's all over for them. So they're only making these beautiful light show, just for a short while. Most of the time is underground. So if we want more fireflies, which I think would be fantastic, we have to be careful with what we're doing in the underground. And what we put on our lawns. And it turns out gardening can relieve anxiety and depression because of microbes in the soil. Isn't that amazing? So there apparently this microorganism, and in compost and leaf mold, can release serotonin for us. In fact, you can get all of our happiness chemicals from nature and from gardening. Maybe gardening with people or going for a walk with somebody through the forest. You can get all these wonderful things, all these benefits. And if you get some sunshine, you might get some vitamin C as well, right? So it's almost like we belong here, like we're meant to be on this planet or something. It's incredible. And now here's the key thing why I keep bringing up native plants. Unfortunately, it'd be great if you could just go to any garden store, buy any plant, and it would be perfect for all of our local wildlife. Unfortunately, over millions of years, the insects have adapted and evolved with the native plants. The native plants often have these chemicals. Remember, I was talking about those chemicals these plants have, which they use to ward off the insects. And then the insects have to figure out how to get around those defenses. So it takes a long time. So they evolve together. That's the main reason you got to have the native plants. So the most common example is the monarch caterpillar. It can only feed on milkweeds. There's no milkweeds. There's no more monarchs left that are gonna make it. Not likely because they've been spread to Australia and things like that. So we want more monarchs in our area, anyways. So it's very important as for a lot of us. And then it turns out that birds they're vicious carnivores actually. And they love to feed insects to their young, especially. And a lot of the birds themselves feed off of insects. And then once you have those insects that feed on plants, then the insects show up to feed on the other insects, right? So it creates this beautiful, well, not always so beautiful. It's pretty rough, but these predatory insects are very helpful to keep them at bay. And it takes time. If you reach out for the insecticides right away, you're going to kill off all the plant eaters, but also all of the insect eaters too. And guess what comes back first? Not the insect eaters. You need the plants to come back, and then you need the plant eaters to come back, right? And then once there's a lot of them, you can support some of these folks here. And so it becomes this web. It's the web of life right there happening in your own yard, and you'll see it. It's amazing. It's really fun. So black-capped chickadee is a great example, and you'll see them in your yard most likely definitely in the eastern deciduous forest area. And they eat insects. They also eat seeds. They love those, but they eat a lot of insects, and they definitely feed insects to their young. They need 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars every day for the 18 days it takes to fledge. So, and that's just one one chickadee couple right there. So this is the strategy and focus of the whole operation. According to Douglas Tallamy, if I'm reading him correctly, is to focus on the pollinators and caterpillars. So plant native plants, which the caterpillars and other insects depend on to survive. So it's really about planting larval host plants, right? So plants that will host a lot of insects and caterpillars. And that creates the largest and richest carrying capacity, can hold the most amount of life and biodiversity. And then you're helping out the pollinators. They'll love the nectar and the pollen, and they'll help propagate more plants, right? And this moves energy around the best, creates that food web. And don't worry if you're focusing on a bumblebee or a butterfly, because if you help them, you're going to end up helping again all the predatory insects and all the other, the whole food web. So it's just fine if you focus on the specialists and choose trees carefully. So if we still have time, I do like to talk about trees here. It might be the most important decision you make. Again, I'm in real estate, so we know that every 6 or 7 years, people usually move. Okay, so you make this beautiful garden in your yard full of native plants, this beautiful habitat. Sadly, it's very common for the new owners to move in and they just take it all out, convert it back to grass until they fall in love with all this stuff, and then they probably will convert it back. But one thing I found is people love trees. So if you can choose, choose a native tree, and if you can situate it, put it in your yard in the right place, and it looks beautiful, it's in the right conditions, there's a very good likelihood that the new homeowners will just keep that tree. And I don't find that to be the case with gardens. Gardens often change, but trees, they're often that's considered, that's a selling point. Sometimes it's considered a benefit. So they'll keep that mature tree, which takes, it can take 20, 30, 100 years to grow. So it's great when people will leave those in place, right? And each section of the tree has a different niche that it provides to different creatures, from the roots all the way on up to the top. And this is for the deciduous forest here, as you can see. So there's the ground cover level, understory, the shrub layer, then the canopy. And each section has different birds and insects you would see living there. The one benefit to having our yards the way they are is that we're basically are creating sort of what's called an edge habitat between a forest and a clearing. And it turns out birds and a lot of wildlife really like those areas. So in the deep, dark forest, you might not see as much wildlife. We still need that for sure. We need more of it, but they really like to hang out on these edges because they can, get at the insects and water and different parts of the habitat really easily and see it as well. And also find some cover when they need it. So, and it turns out there's certain trees that are considered keystone species. This will help the largest number of Lepidoptera, of butterflies and moths. So we only have a little space in some of our yards. Get the biggest bang for your buck by planting some of these. And I think Linda's going to stop me soon, so I'll try to wrap up the tree section here. So yeah, oaks, if you can, that's a great one. Again, this is more for the eastern deciduous area. Okay, you have to do some translating into the prairie biome and the coniferous forest. It'll be different. Okay, but this is the idea. All right, again, it has these keystone species can support the most Lepidoptera, most butterflies and moths, which will then support more birds. So lots of different oaks to choose from, black cherry or something in the cherry family. Black cherry is a very big tree, so some of these are smaller. Willow, Douglas telling me says this might be the most, even more than oak, might be more important for Minnesota in general. And we're having a lot of trouble. Let's see. Yeah, so the black willow, also the cottonwood would be in here too, I think. Wait a minute. No, that's with the poplar. My fault. But yeah, he says willow is very important, but usually it's like marshy and wet areas for those. So a lot of our yards, oak would work great. Black cherry, birch trees, of course, beautiful. There's the cottonwood, poplars, and crabapple. Our native ones are really hard to grow. Might not be a front of house kind of plant, okay? And then the maples, beautiful, and elms, not so much these days. They're working on it. They're trying to hybridize them and have something that we can grow again. We'll see what happens there. But again, the chemistry's changed for that plant. And then hackberry, though, is in the family, in the a little further back in the elm family, and that's a great boulevard tree as well, replacement. So a lot of the non-native ones, they're not going to support as many, hardly any, some zero species. And I think I have to be, am I supposed to stop now, Linda?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and answer the few questions that we have?
Okay.
So we did put the links in the chat, and also if you back out of the webinar, go back to your email that invited you to this webinar, you can go on that main page and you'll see the whole PDF. So somebody asked if they'd love to find the source of the diagram you showed about the lower biodiversity. It was like 6 slides in, right before the slide that said 1 in 4 birds have been lost since 1971.
Oh, yeah, those are Audubon images.
Audubon.
Yeah, anything bird related. Audubon is a great resource, and also Cornell School of Ornithology. Those are your big resources with birds online.
Okay, so Elizabeth asked the question, I live in downtown Minneapolis. How can dense urban areas like this be certified? Is it even possible if little nature habitat is available?
Yeah, that's a tough and also important one. So one thing, just having humans crunched into skyscrapers is a really good thing because that's less land. You know, we can either build out or we can build up. And we're kind of doing both, which isn't good either. But suffice it to say, just building up and having all these people crammed into these apartments is good. I mean, we got to put people somewhere, right? And then there's a lot of factors with birds hitting windows and how lights are used in the downtown areas. So what I'm saying is there's lots of really specific customized things you could try to do to help those kind of environments. And you know, in Minneapolis, they have a peregrine falcon, you know, that was a big deal when they were trying to restore peregrines. And there's a flyway, a huge Mississippi bird flyway, right downtown Minneapolis. So it's things we need to think about when we build these buildings, when they're getting approved. So there's stuff on the larger scale. So if we have a lot of neighbors working together, that might get the developer's attention before they build it, right? And what materials they're using. So that's long term. Short term, the National Wildlife Federation with certifying your yard, they have a way. So it's so simple that you could just certify your balcony, for example. So there's ways that you could have some pots, maybe if your apartment will allow it. Maybe a little bird feeder, you know, and a bird bath. So you can still have those elements even on your balcony, possibly. So that's one idea, another idea.
Dale asks, my church wants to convert parking lot islands into natural areas. Any suggestions?
That's a beautiful thing. There's I have a great picture of that. I won't be able to bring it up, but we have a business over here. They have their parking lot, right? And then there's no grass. It's all trees, rain garden, and native plants. And it's beautiful. And it's still fully functional as a parking lot. So they're helping with avoiding the runoff too with those rain gardens. It's just, you know, funneling seeps down into the ground. And I wish more parking lots had trees, right? Shade. I always look for a shady spot when I'm parking because, yeah, so it has lots of benefits, I think, can be done.
Michelle asks, I have sandy soil, lots of sun, grass struggles. What would you recommend for a grass?
I'm not sure if she means like a non-native grass or if she means a native grass, but I can definitely not help you with like a lawn grass. You'd probably just want to talk to a trusted nursery nearby or garden center. But there would be lots of native grasses you could grow. Yeah, most of so we have the tall grass prairie. A lot of them are really big, but I would think a lot of those grasses would grow. Some that people really love are the little blue stem, If you had a lot of room, you could do the big blue stem, but usually the little blue stem or the prairie drop seed, people really enjoy those.
Yep. Okay. The next question is, we're interested in changing landscape at my kids' school to more native. Do you have resources for grants that the schools could use to make these changes?
I would love to start a nonprofit someday that that helped with that. And I would so yeah, there's many different resources for that. Again, the National Wildlife Federation has design ideas and resources, but as far as grants, um, I would definitely just talk to your county or your watershed and see what they can offer you. Or maybe sometimes it's your city as well, your neighborhood organization. And there's lots of people trying to support that for sure.
Um, yeah, so let's see. Wild Ones has national grant money for schools and, oh, Ava's on. Um, Wild One National has grant money for schools. So Wild Ones. Okay, I think that's about all the questions. Okay, so the person who was looking for native grass, we thought about adding clover, and then you showed violets. I'm concerned about too many bees because the grandkids playing in the backyard, but I'd like to add more native grass. So you're saying the blue stem would work.
Yeah, the problem with our native grasses is they are clumps and they don't, you can't like run across it. So it's not really a turf grass. So yeah, it's and again, if you need turf grass, you need turf grass. Nothing you can do about that. But yeah, if there's area not used very much, maybe some of those native grasses.
Um, okay, then let's see.
Looks like we're just about out of time. I did get one question
Yeah,
in, not in
so
the group there, Linda, that was, does choosing to not mow your lawn have any benefits for habitat? Would native species ever start growing if I just stop mowing?
Um, so I have heard of people doing that. They literally just wait to see what pops up. In general, I do not. I strongly do not recommend doing that because the first thing that comes in are weeds and non-native species and invasive species that are sometimes very difficult to get rid of and actually harm the environment. So that's why I showed you some of those pictures of things getting out of control. And so I don't recommend that. It's better to take a small section at a time and plant a tree, for example, or plant a small pollinator garden, which is, I didn't quite have time to cover that, but they have kits now that a lot of these native plant nurseries sell. And basically, you don't have to research too long. You just make sure you have room where you can plant it. And that's a really great thing a lot of them have today. One of our links, I think we're going to show you some of where you can get trees and native plants.
right.
I was just going to mention that too, Linda, real quick. I know we're just ran out of time too, but we're going to send that PDF with all your links out to everybody that's on today. So we'll just, everybody that's in today, we're going to link for that. And for those of you in recording, go to the invite, download that, and we'd be happy to get that for you. So.
Okay, and then the last thing is Ava also said the Lower Minnesota River Valley Audubon has grant money. But I want to thank you today, Dan. Next week on the Moss program will be jumping worms, new non-native worms in Minnesota. So join us next week for the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship series on jumping worms. So thank you again, Dan, and thank you everybody for joining.